I'm Dr. Scott Lyons, and you're watching or listening to The Gently Used Human. Have you ever noticed how, as the seasons change, it's not just the world around us that transforms, but also our inner landscapes? Joining me this week is Dr. Greg Hammer, a professor at Stanford University School of Medicine, Paediatric Intensive Care Physician, Paediatric Anaesthesiologist, and Mindfulness Expert. Together, we'll navigate the essentials of physical wellness. Think the rejuvenating power of sleep, the vitality found in movement, and the nourishment provided by mindful eating. Dr. Hammer invites us to explore the spiritual scaffolding supporting our well-being, built on the pillars of gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. Today's chat is brimming with insights that promise to illuminate the path to wellness through the changing seasons and beyond, with the wise and wonderful Dr. Greg Hammer as our guide. Let's get this going. Dr. Greg Hammer, welcome to The Gently Used Human. We're so excited to have you on and just connect with you on all things longevity and well-being. Welcome.
Thank you, Scott. It is wonderful to be with you. I've checked you out online. I love what you're doing. Keep up the good work. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to join you today.
Thank you. Coming from you, that means a lot. So let's dive into physical and spiritual well-being. What are the components of physical well-being? What are the components of spiritual well-being? And are they separate? How do they interact?
Sure. That's a great question. Well, I think like everything in the universe, according to my outlook, everything is interconnected, but certainly our physical and mental and spiritual health are very closely intertwined. So I think all of the elements that we can discuss are very closely interrelated and interdependent. So for example, when we talk about our physical well-being, we can simplify and talk about the domains of sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And they are very intertwined. So for example, at this time of year, people may get a little bit blue. The dark hours are increasing, at least until toward the end of next month. And, people tend to get a little depressed and then they don't sleep that well. And then we are fatigued. And I could tell you after a call night, being in the intensive care unit, especially at this time of year and next month in particular and thereafter, there's a box of See's candies often sitting at the nursing station. When I've been up most of the night, there's nothing that hits the spot more than a piece of that fine chocolate. So when we're fatigued, we tend to go for sugary stuff that's not particularly healthy. It sends our blood sugar way up. And then, our nutrition in general may suffer because again, we're not eating in a healthy manner. And so our sleep makes us tired. We love sugary stuff. And then we're too fatigued or we're crashed from the sugar high when we have the opportunity to go for a power walk or get some other form of exercise. So this kind of winter blues, or for whatever reason, when our sleep is disturbed, our exercise and nutrition also suffer. And so these three elements are very, very much interdependent. And when it comes to our, let's just call it our spiritual health, we can call it mental, psychologic, what have you. I think they're all almost the same thing. Our spiritual health really depends on our physical well-being as well. Now, we may have physical disabilities that we can't change. So we have to work on accepting those. But in general, if we're not taking care of our bodies, it will affect our mental and spiritual well-being. But as you know, my book, Gain Without Pain, includes the acronym GAIN, which is in capital letters, and GAIN stands for what I think are the four pillars of spiritual health. And those are gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. So I think it behooves all of us to have a physical wellness practice, if you will, a plan and intention, and also a mental, psychological, spiritual health plan. And I think these are both of the utmost importance if we want to be healthy, happy, and live a long, healthy, and productive life.
Absolutely. There's so much good stuff to unpack in there, and I'm excited to do that with you. Can we start with the physical? Can we start with what are your main go-tos in terms of sleep, food, nutrition? And maybe we can even break down each of those subjects. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's useful to do that because if we're not being pragmatic, then I don't think there's anything to take away from our conversation for anybody who's listening. But sleep. So sleep hygiene, these are basic things that most of which we all know. I will add a couple of things that maybe people haven't thought about.
Yeah.
Coffee, for example. So, being a pharmacology researcher, I'm aware of half-lives. That is, we are given or ingest a substance, we absorb some of it, we get peak concentration in our bloodstream. So in this case, caffeine. We have a cup of coffee. It might have 120 milligrams of caffeine, might have more, could have less, but if you're like me and you like strong coffee, it probably has more. We get a peak caffeine concentration in our bloodstream 45 minutes later. And then the time it takes for that concentration to go down by 50% is called the half-life. So in other words, we have that strong cup of coffee at 7:30 in the morning. At 8:15 or 8:30, we get a peak in the bloodstream concentration of caffeine. The half-life of caffeine is 5 or 6 hours. So what that means is that at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we have the amount of caffeine in our bloodstream that would result typically from half a cup of coffee. And then 5 or 6 hours later, a quarter cup of coffee. So here's where that really becomes relevant. So I used to have a cup of coffee commonly after lunch. If I was lucky enough to get a break to wolf something down at work, I would often get a little sleepy afterwards. So I'd have a cup of coffee at 1:30 in the afternoon. And the fact is that that's equivalent to having half a cup of coffee 5 or 6 hours later. So 6:30 or 7:30 in the evening, and equivalent to having a quarter a cup of coffee when I should be asleep. So that was keeping me up. That was actually eroding the quality and quantity of my sleep. So I stopped having that cup of coffee in the afternoon. Similarly, alcohol, ethanol, the alcohol that's in the potable kind of alcohol that we consume in various beverages, binds with a receptor called the GABA receptor that is the same receptor that our general anesthetics and sedative drugs interact with. So we know when we administer general anesthesia, we're stimulating that GABA receptor big time. And the individual who's anesthetized is unconscious, but they're not really sleeping. So if we look at their brainwave patterns, their EEG, it's not physiologic. And having alcohol or even a large meal and certainly caffeine proximate to the time of going to sleep results in deficient sleep. And, sleep is not just a passive activity. There's a lot going on in our brain when we're asleep. For example, proteins like tau protein, for example, and amyloid protein tend to accumulate in our brains, especially with repeated head injury, which fortunately most of us don't have. But we do have these proteins that floating around in our brain. And when we're asleep, our immune system clears those. And that happens typically in deep sleep. And so if we're not enjoying deep sleep and getting the full restorative physiologic benefit, these proteins tend to accumulate and they're associated with dementia. So sleep is just a very important, I would even call it an activity. So avoiding caffeine in the afternoon and thereafter, if you're at all sensitive to it. Likewise with alcohol, try to have it earlier if you're going to have any rather than later. Avoid going to sleep after a big meal. So avoid eating too late if you want to have a good night's sleep. And then the other things are obvious. I think a dark room, a cool environment if possible. I set my thermostat at 65 or 62 and have a nice comforter. I have blackout shades. Avoiding screen time, particularly if we're sensitive to the blue light from our screens, our phones, our tablets, laptops, television, proximate to the time of sleep. Read something relatively boring or not too stimulating, I think is better activity, among others, before you go to sleep. So those are basic sleep hygiene elements.
Yeah, I love that. It's so important to have sleep hygiene. And I think like some of your work I know is also about navigating our own negative biases and like what's come from our evolution of having more negative bias. And I think that's so interesting. One of the things I love about sleep research is that, as we know, sleep helps us maintain our cognitive skills, such as like attention, learning, memory, all of those important things. And when we sleep, we are processing our day, we're processing our emotions. And if we don't get enough sleep, the first thing that's going to be processed is more of our negative experiences of the day. That's part of our survival mechanism, our negative bias. And if we don't get enough sleep, the positive experiences won't be metabolized and processed through into our memory. And so often when we wake up in like a bad mood, it's because we've gotten a lack of sleep. And the first order of processing memories is going to be negative. And if we didn't get to process the positive, we're still like in the flooding of the negative memories and processing of that experience. And when I found that out, I was like, oh, whoa. That's why when we talk about like waking up on the wrong side of the bed, is literally we haven't gotten a chance to metabolize or process and like absorb the positive experiences of our day. And our attention then, if we're already in a negative space, our attention of that day goes towards more negative stimuli.
That is a very enlightening and beautifully put way of connecting sleep with depression and, how well we function in our negativity bias. I love that, Scott. That's I haven't really thought of things that way, but that resonates.
Yeah, because dealing with
very interesting.
Because I know in your work you really address like how do we deal with this negative bias that kind of affects our physical and spiritual and mental well-being.
Absolutely. Well, we have the negativity bias, and then we have this profound distraction with the past and the future in ways that are maladaptive. And so I think we need to have a plan if we're going to deal with both of those. And without really fully thinking about prior things as you just put them, the plan to deal with our negativity bias and our inability or relative lack of ability to be present, which is where happiness lives, involves focusing on the basics of our physical well-being and our spiritual well-being. And our physical well-being involves attention to sleep.
Yeah.
And thereby, as you explained, that helps neutralize our negativity bias or put us in a more positive light, increase the positivity of our thoughts, as well as exercise and nutrition. So I think, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And, I appreciate what you said very much.
I want to take a moment to give a loud shout out to the Embody Lab, which is one of the most incredible resources for body-based and somatic therapies. This show is all about healing, and the Embody Lab does exactly that. Whether you're on your own journey of transformation and discovery, or enhancing your skill sets in your career as like a coach or a therapist, a body worker, or really any career where you are supporting other gently used humans, the Embody Lab is your place for deep, inspiring, and impactful workshops, certificates, masterclasses, and an incredible community of like-minded folks. I love the Embody Lab, and so do so many other people that call it a platform to come home to over and over again. The Embody Lab is giving my listeners an exclusive offer, a one-time 10% off code to enhance your embodied well-being. All you have to do is go to theembodylab.com and use the code GentlyUse10 at checkout. What are some of the key components in terms of physical health and nutrition? Like, what should people be moving towards and avoiding? And there's so much controversy about this.
Yes.
Which is there's like, why isn't there not a consensus?
Yeah, I think there's not a clear consensus because things are complicated. And also, it's a relatively hard subject to study. We really have to look at epidemiologic or population studies. And, people are very complicated in their habits. In their genetics and their epigenetics. And so you have to look at large populations to try to glean what kind of eating habits are associated with longevity. And so it's very complicated, and it's not surprising to me that we don't have a clear consensus. So I think, somewhat as the Buddha learned, the middle path, the middle way might be most appropriate. But I think that there are those in the Dean Cornish camp that believe in low fat. And then on the other hand, there's the low carbohydrate people. Even I've seen a podcast, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he's an advocate of just eating meat. So I think, Scott, the preponderance of evidence is toward moving to a more plant-based diet.
Yeah.
So I think that lean, preferably organic meats are fine, and maybe they're even healthy to the extent that they supply a lot of protein, which I think as we age is underappreciated.
Yeah.
But I think moderation and again, relatively lean meats, chicken, etc., fish have the benefit of providing a lot of protein and also vital omega-3 oils. So salmon, sardines, things like that are healthy. I think that, again, mostly we should be eating a plant-based diet, lots of colorful fruits and vegetables for the phytochemicals they contain, lots of fiber. I think our gut microbiome has, really come to the fore in terms of scientific attention and its importance and the role of fiber in maintaining our gut microbiome, among other things. So plant-based diet, obviously avoiding sugary foods and refined foods, trying to eat raw, healthy, unprocessed foods. And, I think also not only what we eat, but when we eat.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of evidence showing now that what I thought was a fad, that is intermittent fasting, but at least sort of limiting the time that we eat to about an 8-hour period, if we can.
Yeah.
Now I say that as somebody who works in the operating room in the intensive care unit. I never know when I'm going to be able to eat again. I wasn't necessarily fasting for 16 hours, but now that I have a little more control over my schedule, I have adopted that. And the data show that when we eat within an 8-hour period, let's say from 11 a.m. or noon, and we're kind of done eating by 7 or 8 in the evening, that's 16 hours that we're not eating, including some time when we're hungry, provides benefit. It kicks into action genes called sirtuins. There's a guy named David Sinclair, who's a PhD scientist at Harvard, who's actually discovered these genes initially in yeast and then in humans. These sirtuins, when activated by that fasting period or low-grade stress called hormesis, it's a metabolic stress to be fasting and hungry, kick in these sirtuins, and then they are really important for cleaning up DNA fragments and other things within the cell that are not associated with good health. So there are a number of processes that are activated by hormesis or this low-grade stress, including intermittent fasting. The sirtuins. It also activates our systems that tend to get rid of old cells that tend to accumulate in our tissues that are associated with inflammatory response. So this kind of low-grade stress, typified in part by intermittent fasting, is actually important. So what we eat, I think, more plant-based, maybe some lean animal protein for the protein value itself. Otherwise, limiting refined and especially sugary foods. Continuous glucose monitoring. So there's a device that you can, with a prescription from a physician, put on the back of your arm, and you sync it with an app on your phone. You can actually monitor your blood sugar. And I found this very useful because I've discovered that certain foods, certain starches that I thought were healthy, actually raise my blood sugar quite a bit.
Like
and
what?
If I consume them with a bit of protein, it blunts this response. So, things like bread. So nice, healthy whole grain bread. I have a sandwich with a healthy amount of bread. My blood sugar goes above 150. If I have a significant amount of protein and even fat like avocado with the bread, the increase in blood sugar is less. So this is something that we can discover by wearing one of these devices. Very useful.
Are proteins and fats in that way a modulator for glucose?
Yes, they are. So, I've even discovered by wearing one of these continuous glucose monitors and paying attention to what shows up on my phone, if I just have a bowl of fruit, healthy organic fruit in the morning, my blood sugar spikes.
Yeah.
Which is not surprising because there's a lot of fructose in that fruit. And I think too much fruit is not healthy. Yeah. But if I have fruit and yogurt with the protein in the yogurt my blood sugar spikes to a much lesser degree. So yes, the protein modulates the increase in blood sugar, and healthy fats do that as well.
Here's to parfaits.
Without a lot of sugar.
Without a lot of sugar. And the other thing about sugar is like the inflammatory response. And like we know whether it's, the link between inflammatory responses from nutrition to how it affects our sleep, and the link to depression. That depression is an inflammatory disease too.
So interesting.
In the brain. Yeah.
And this sort of chronic inflammation, which may be triggered by chronic stress or other, accumulation of these old senescent or dead cells in the body, or a number of other issues, the chronic inflammation actually ages us. Yeah. So we're developing, not, we, the scientific community, not me personally, but there's a lot more information now on biologic clocks. So looking at the aging of cells by looking at patterns of epigenetics, as in DNA methylation. So the DNA, the basic genome in our cells, is the same in every cell in our body. So what makes a liver cell different than a brain cell is the epigenetics. It's these factors that bind to the genes or DNA in our chromosomes and switch some on, some off. They modulate the gene activity or gene expression. Mm-hmm. So, there's significant information that the way the epigenetics modify our DNA in terms of attaching, in this case, these methyl groups, patterns of DNA methylation are associated with aging. We can look at our telomeres. The telomeres are little protective caps at the tips of our chromosomes that are akin to those plastic caps at the tips of our shoelaces, and they prevent the shoelaces from fraying in the same way that telomeres prevent the chromosomes from fraying.
That's just the best analogy I've ever heard, by the way, of that.
As we age, our telomeres shorten, and with chronic inflammation, our telomeres shorten. So we know that telomere shortening is associated with senescence. In other words, when our telomeres get shorter, our chromosomes are less healthy. And so the number of times that a cell with short telomeres can divide and, sort of replenish injured cells in the vicinity and so on is limited. And so this is a process associated with aging. And we're actually getting, I think in 5 years, Scott, we'll be able to donate a drop of blood, and the appropriate laboratory will be able to give us our biologic age by looking at our biologic clock. And based on our degree of inflammation, the way we eat, the way we sleep, the way we exercise, and our mental health, I think our biologic clock hopefully can be significantly younger, or show that we're younger than our chronologic or calendar age.
I would like that. Do you think we can tell with, 5 years feels too long. I want to know now. But do you think there are ways that we can look at someone or assess someone's sense of biological age without yet that technology?
There are companies that will do this now. I just don't know that they're ready for prime time, and, they're relatively expensive. Yeah. I think that we as individuals, if we're objective about our energy level, about our mental acuity, about our mood, the way we heal, the way we feel when we get up in the morning, and what our energy level is like, we sort of can get some idea of our biologic age. I think, mine, I believe, is significantly younger than my chronologic age. And, people when I tell them that I'm 93 years old, they're surprised. I'm just kidding. I'm not really that old, but, I don't know. You look at people, and I think there are sort of markers. And I think when you talk to them, you get more information. Yeah. When you do an activity with them, you get more information. Yeah. But I think it's exciting science, and in order to really study something, you have to be able to measure it, right? Yeah. So you know that as well as I do. So I think our ability to measure our biologic age with these biologic clock tools is going to really be very enlightening.
I think there's I was talking to a client some time ago, and they were saying, I'm tired. And I was like, oh, is there ever a time you're not tired? Are there things moments you feel rejuvenated? And they turned to me and said, wait, doesn't everyone feel tired all the time? And I actually paused in that moment and I was like, I don't know. I guess I'm tired a lot too. I think most of us are tired all the time, or quite a bit of the time. Mm-hmm. And which is, I mean, certainly what can lead to burnout, which I'm excited to talk to you about today too. But like, is that a sign of like, is that just natural to be tired most of the time? Or is that really a sign of maybe a faster aging of our cells?
That's a good question. I think you mentioned burnout, and I think that burnout can be simply defined as the emotional and physical fatigue, being tired, that is a result of chronic stress.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm 68 years old. I think that in my lifetime, this past 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years, has been the most stressful of all for all of us. I'm talking about the stress to which we're all exposed. I think that the pandemic, there's still ill effects of the pandemic that are quite resonant. The kids that were teenagers and may still be teenagers during the pandemic and thereafter missed out on so many developmentally important activities, athletic events, social events, proms, graduation ceremonies, etc. The war in Ukraine, I mean, that just wears on us. It's just, too awful to even imagine what's happening over there as it is in the Middle East. And on top of that, we have a government that is just dysfunctional and deeply divided. And I think this weighs on all of us as well. When we look at our political system, it needs a lot of work, to say the least. And then we have, what our young kids in particular are exposed to is there going to be a world for my kids and my grandchildren? So this sort of eco depression, if you will, anxiety. So, we could go on. There's so many things going on right now. I just don't remember a more stressful time in my life. And I think it's exhausting to all of us. So, I don't know if things were different 10 years ago, Scott. I don't remember how tired I was then, but, this is where the gain elements become really important. We have to have the I in gain, which is a plan. It's the intention. It's the purposefulness to really kind of sit with all of what's going on and put it in its place. To accept that which we cannot change, as the Serenity Prayer would have. That's the A in gain, which is acceptance, and have a plan as to how to deal with it. If we just sort of do nothing, then we default to our old habits of this negativity bias, this distraction leading to poor sleep, exercise, nutrition, chronic stress, chronic inflammation, aging. We have to have a plan. And the good news is, as you know, our brains have this amazing quality called neuroplasticity. So if we implement a healthy plan, we can actually, in baby steps, kind of right the ship and make steady progress toward being happier and, I hope, less exhausted, less stressed, less inflamed. But we need that plan.
Well, you're bringing up a lot of interesting points. One is, okay, it's not too late. Because I think when we start looking at we dive deep into the science of it and we're like, oh, my little shoelace capsules are falling apart. Fuck, what do I do now? And is it too late? And am I just going to am I aged forever? Or is there hope? And the other thing you're bringing up, which is interesting, is I don't know if we're ever going to get out of an ecosystem where there is stress around it, where there is worry, concern. I mean, I think what we're seeing is, as you're naming the wars and what's going on, pandemics and, the destruction of our environment. It's these may not go away, but do we become more adaptive to them? And what's the cost of that? Those are a lot of questions, maybe even good questions.
Yes. Well, I think, there are things that we cannot control and things that we can control to a varying degree. So I think it's important to discern. We cannot control what's going on in the Ukraine.
No.
We have little or no influence on what's happening in the Middle East.
Yeah.
we do have some influence about the environment. So I think it does behoove us all, and will, I think, put our own lives in a bit more of a positive state if we do our role, simple things, recycle, ride our bikes instead of driving, try not to take too many airline trips, use public transportation, things like that. I mean, we're not all in a position to do that. I've got solar panels and I ride my bike to work, but I don't feel self-righteous about that. I'm very fortunate and relatively affluent, so I can afford to do that and afford to live close to where I work, which, by the way, in the area of Stanford is no small feat. No. So I don't give myself a lot of credit for those things, but there are things that we can do. And I think if we each do what we can do individually, and I think that includes some political pressure and how we cast our votes, at least we have some say in what's happening with the environment. I wouldn't write it off altogether as something over which we have zero influence. So we all need to do our own part. And the same with, we talk about this political divide. It's very depressing to, turn on CNN or whatever cable station appeals to you and hear the mess that's in our government, or that is our government, you might say. But, we can all treat each other with dignity and respect each other's views, and not kind of burrow deeper and deeper into our own set of beliefs and judge others with different beliefs. So again, this is an area where, we can at least have some impact. We need to recognize what we can do and what's beyond our control. And to the extent that we can have even just an iota of influence in these areas in a positive way, I think that we all should be engaged in doing so.
This show is also brought to you by the absolutely stunning and powerful tools of transformation that are created by Omala. Oof, even the name Omala transports you to a place of flow and vitality. These are some of my favorite products ever. They have an amazing color-changing yoga mat that responds to your temperature and presence and reflects back your posture in real time. There's this incredible smelling skin balm candle that heats up to activate all the essential oils and vitamins that your skin has been craving. I mean, look, if I could live in a giant bath of this candle, I would 100% do it. They also have these journals that lead you into profound insight, and then you get to plant those journals to create a stunning flower garden. What? I mean, if that's not deep and inventive, I don't know what is. If you're someone who desires to live a luxurious flow of life and who believes in transformative wellness, then you have to check out Omala. Omala is giving my listeners an exclusive discount to treat yourself to something that is as special as you, boo. All you have to do is go to omala.com, that's OMALA.com, and use the code DrScott10 at checkout. And a portion of every purchase goes to an incredible charity. You got this. The way you talk about this, there's a certain level of agency that's been reclaimed. And I do want to acknowledge that because, in terms of this idea of moving towards happiness, agency is an essential ingredient. And what are some of the practices or things that you enlist in your life that give you and help you reclaim some of this agency that brings you towards this physical and spiritual health and longevity and well-being?
Well, I love Dr. John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness, and he's certainly one of my heroes. He says that mindfulness is simply the awareness of the present moment on purpose without judgment. So there are some of the gain principles, the on purpose or the intention, the I in gain and the N in gain being non-judgment, and the commitment to having a practice to be more aware of the present moment. How do we do that? Well, I think, as we've been discussing, we first have to get our physical well-being in order. Have a plan, focus on our sleep hygiene, focus on the important types of exercise, aerobic or cardio exercise, strength training or resistance exercise, core, exercise, and balance. And there's lots of literature and stuff online about how to do these things. But we need to be very active and somewhat disciplined about how we approach that. And then our nutrition, the same thing. Again, we need to have a plan. We need to implement our plan. So sleep, exercise, nutrition. And then we go to the gain elements. Have a gratitude practice. Gratitude is so intrinsic to happiness, as you know. You know, it can be, we may know somebody or imagine somebody who's poor and happy or physically challenged and happy, but I think it's hard to imagine somebody who's ungrateful and happy. So we have so much for which to be grateful, but we need to have a plan to really incorporate a focus on gratitude, like the 3-minute gain meditation in the morning. Acceptance. You know, I lost my son at the age of 29, 6 years ago, and that pain is always going to be there, but I need to sit and actually bring this pain into my heart and actually nurture it with my heart, sit with it, learn to accept it, because if I resist it, it increases my suffering. There's a formula in my book, suffering equals pain times resistance. So acceptance is sort of 1 over resistance. So the more we accept, the less we resist, the less we suffer. But we need to have a practice. In gain, it's, as I said, you know, all of this needs purposefulness, needs a plan. And then we can actually learn to be less judgmental. And, you know, I think it takes a plan, but in the gain meditation, for example, Scott, we may, as we connect with a deep, slow breath and this kind of breathing that we do throughout the 3 or 4 minutes, activates our parasympathetic nervous system, lowers our heart rate, blood pressure, even our blood sugar. We contemplate, for example, an image of the Earth apparently suspended in space, one of these beautiful NASA images. And we actually contemplate that the Earth is just a planet. It's neither good nor bad. Things do not have to be good or bad. And therefore, it's only logical for me to think, I am just the person that I am. I am neither good nor bad. And we sort of connect this to our breath. And then, you know, we go back to the breath, open our eyes, and we've done our gain practice. We're ready to go out in the world. But when we are judging others or circumstances, or most harshly ourselves, when we have this practice, a light bulb goes off. Oh, I'm judging this person. I can actually have a little laugh at my own tendencies and drop the judgment. So I think we have to have a plan, but it goes to the basics of physical wellness, sleep, exercise, nutrition, mental, spiritual health, gratitude, acceptance, intention, non-judgment. And I think when we have these practices, we become more positive. We become more present. We become kinder to others, you know, when we're not judging them. So, you know, I'm fairly liberal or with a dash of libertarian myself. But when I'm talking to somebody with extreme views, and I start to judge them as somebody I'm going to write off, I'm not really going to listen to what they say. And I have that light bulb moment, and I'm able to drop the judgment and listen and be present and have some clarity in how I interpret what they're saying. So I think we can all do better, but you know, it takes a plan. It takes a commitment.
Absolutely.
It's never too late, as you said, you know, with your shoelaces, you know, when you find that those plastic caps are cracked and broken and the tips of your shoelaces are fraying, just, you know, get some tape, maybe some electrical tape, and put a wrap or two around there and reinforce those telomeres at the tips of your shoelaces.
Just like that. Can you do this and the honor of guiding us through the 3 to 4 minute meditation practice, the gain meditation practice?
Sure. We have 3 minutes.
Oh yeah, we got time. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to do that. And Scott, I'm going to close my eyes. So I would just suggest that anybody who's watching do the same. So we get up in the morning, we open the blinds, may or may not be dark, according to the time of year and our location. We do our morning hygiene thing, and then we find a comfortable place to sit. We close our eyes. We focus on our breath. And there are so many benefits to slowing our breath down. So we breathe in through our nose to a slow count of 3, pause to a count of 3, and then gently relax without effort and let the breath go to a count of 4. So repeat the cycle of in-breath through the nose to a count of 3, pausing to a count of 3, exhaling through our nose or mouth slowly to a count of 4. And again, we're breathing into our belly. We're activating our parasympathetic nervous system, the vagus nerve. We're decreasing our heart rate, our blood pressure, our blood sugar. And we appreciate the fullness of the breath. It's always there. It's always accessible. And we go to our gratitude and we contemplate some of the many things for which we are grateful. I'm grateful for my community, my neighbors, people with whom I work. I'm grateful for my beautiful daughter, grateful for other loved ones in my life, my friends. I'm so grateful for my relative health and wellness, even imperfect or less than extreme as they may be. I'm grateful for what I have in terms of my health. I'm grateful for having a roof over my head. Unlike some people in the world, I don't have to worry about my home being destroyed. And I link this gratitude to my breath, slow inhale, pause, and exhale. And I go to the A in gain, which is acceptance. And here we acknowledge that life is not all pleasant and joyous. There are painful, uncomfortable experiences we all have. So we may contemplate one of those painful or uncomfortable experiences, maybe a conflict with a friend or a spouse, loss of a loved one, which we've all experienced. And we actually visualize bringing this pain into our heart. So opening our chest wall, opening our heart, bringing this painful experience into our heart, nourishing it, sustaining it with our heart, relaxing our muscles, deepening and slowing our breath. Until when we ask ourselves the question, can I live with this pain forever? The answer is yes. Then we go to the I in gain as we focus too on our breath, slow and deep. And this is our intention. So we may, for example, focus on our current physical experience. Our intention is to be more present. We appreciate the pressure of the chair against our body, the sound we may hear in the distance of an airplane going by or a car. We notice the slight sweetness in the air we're breathing. We notice our present sensations, our experience. And we recognize our intention to be more present, more positive, look at the bright side of things, be more kind, compassionate, generous with others. This is our intention. And as we also focus on the depth and slowness of our breath, we go to the N in gain, which is non-judgment. And we may picture an image of the Earth apparently suspended in space, one of these beautiful NASA or European Space Agency images. And we recognize that the Earth is just a planet. It is neither good nor bad. And it's only logical to think that I too am just a person. I'm just the human being that I am. I'm neither good nor bad. I am simply that I am. And we let this I amness resonate and we link it to our slow, deep, cyclical breath. I am. I'm neither good nor bad. I am simply the person that I am. And we go back to the pure focus on our slow and deep breath at our own pace. And we slowly open our eyes and we're ready to go out in the world.
That was beautiful. Thank you. And I know that in your work, you talk about like 3 to 4 minutes is substantial. It's enough. And that as I'm sitting here in the resonance of that experience, I have this image of settling deeper into like a place of comfort and presence, aliveness of this moment. And I could just even imagine that just 3 minutes or 4 minutes, as you said, about a day is like, that really is enough. It doesn't have to be this long, extended practice of focus. It's more just a place of attuning in to what's here and what I would like to be focusing on.
I agree, Scott. And what happens when we have a daily practice, and I think it's nice to do it in the morning. So I tell my trainees and others, just set your alarm clock for 3 minutes earlier than you would normally and go to bed 3 minutes earlier. Who doesn't have 3 minutes? When you do this consistently, you find that when you may be walking down the hall, having a meeting with your boss, and you have that acute stress response, you feel your heart rate going up, you imagine your blood pressure is going up, you're getting a little jittery, what have you, a light bulb goes off and you realize you can just go to your breath. Mm-hmm. So let's, again, just while I'm walking, focus on the depth and slowness of my breath. Mm-hmm. And this, will neutralize that sympathetic or acute stress response. And so it's a matter of resilience. We're actually, through this practice, we're becoming more resilient. We're becoming more able to bring that acute stress response, all those responses, back down to neutral. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, as I said, is that when we're being ungrateful or resisting an unpleasant thought or experience or lapsing into the old habits without purposefulness or being judgmental, we get those light bulb moments. And, the more we incorporate or rewire our brains, incorporate these practices, the more we have the light bulb moments that allow us to make adjustments in those negative thoughts that we're having or those negative patterns of behavior. So it's an amazing, the brain is amazing. The ability of the brain to change, to adapt is quite remarkable.
Mm. I also, in addition to that, I want to just name the ability for us to find restoration within ourselves is incredible. I mean, some time ago we were talking about the ills of the world, and when I commented on, your sense of agency amongst the things that we can change or have some impact towards, and quite a bit that we don't have impact towards. And to come back and keep recognizing within ourselves of oh, I did that. I gave myself 4 minutes. I did that. I allowed myself to settle enough to process through something, to reclaim some of my energy back to me as opposed to something that's been holding or tightening or repressed down. I did that. And to really, when we talk about gratitude, I'm oh, wow, I'm really grateful that we have this innate capacity within us to restore at least some of our innate vitality.
That's beautiful. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you so much for giving us that practice and reminding, and certainly for me, reminding me of that power. Thank you, Greg, so much for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure. Where can people find you? Where can people read more of your work?
I think the simplest way is going to my website, which is greghammermd.com, greghammermd.com. And there's a lot of media. I hope that our sharing of time this morning will be there at some point soon. Lots of other media and ways to get in touch.
Beautiful. And we'll put that in the show notes as well, everyone. So please check out Dr. Greg Hammer's work and his book. It will restore. Thank you so much for your beautiful work, Greg, and longevity and well-being. It's really needed in this world.
Scott, I echo those remarks as well. Thank you for teaching me some really wonderful things today as well.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening in, and we look forward to getting your feedback on each and every episode, including this one. Thank you for listening to the Gently Used Human podcast with Dr. Scott Lyons and friends. Visit gentlyused.com for fun extras, including submitting your questions for advice from a Midwestern mom. And don't forget to spill the tea and gossip about the show with all your friends and frenemies. And you know what? Show us some love by giving us 5 stars and leaving a review in your favorite apps. This helps us connect with all the other gently used humans out there. Oh, and by the way, you look fierce today.